Hello and welcome to the Warp Shelf. I'm Frank Duran.
I'm Deshaun Vasquez.
Today we are two artists reaching into the sand dunes of, what would you say, Deshaun?
In addition to Spice, let's say movies, comics, TV shows, just general art, anything that's worth taking with you. Now that can be literally, as in putting it on your actual warp shelf at home, or it can mean just spiritually if it's only available on streaming or you just don't happen to own it, but it means a lot to you.
So today we're talking about something we hyped up last episode. We're talking about Dune Part 2. We're excited to talk about this because we did a Dune Part 1 episode, and Deshaun gave this to my wife a couple years ago, so we got this book sitting right here.
Yeah, and I have my old paperback.
That's
like
a nice copy.
the version that you have that I got from Mary is like the mass market paperback now, which is way nicer than this one. This is what the mass market paperback used to be. I'm like, damn, the new one's way cooler.
What's the signature on there?
This was do you remember Comic Book Girl 19 back in the Disney?
Yes. Yeah,
now known as Danica XIX. She started a Dune book club, which is how I first actually got to read it. Where the way it worked is you could pre-order a bundle where it's just like, okay, I'll get you a mass market paperback, I'll sign it, I'll make a custom bookmark where it has a little tassel of like the Spice Melange. I can't show the bookmark because it's very NSFW. But the cool. way it would work is that every week there would be a stream on Twitch, one with a pre-recorded segment about basically a summation of like the allotted pages, like up to where you were supposed to read, and then it would be followed by like a Twitch Q&A to like really get into like the meat of the book. It was one of the things that inspired me to do like a book club with my Discord buddies. It's like, oh, it's a cool idea. She's done it for a couple things. She's done it for like the first 3 Dune books, I think. She might have done the 4th. She's also done it for stuff like I think she did one on the Art of War. She did one on Watchmen. She's done a bunch.
Nice. But today we're actually talking about the movie experience. We won't be we'll talk a little bit about the book, but of course, just because it's an adaptation, but we are talking about Part 2 in total. Now, Deshaun, what's your first feelings coming out of the theater for Dune Part 2?
My initial thought was, going into it, I know Villeneuve was already gearing up to do Messiah. He had said that pretty much after the first film came out, that if he were to get his wishes, he would do Dune Messiah, and then that would be it for him. And going into that, like, Messiah is kind of a hard book to adapt, and going into it, I was just like, I don't know how much a Messiah adaptation would really work. And then, after coming out of it, I'm like, oh, he directly sets that up.
I felt that too. Was that he even said it when he like first cast Zendaya? She was like, "You're not a big part of Part 1, but Part 2's your movie." And then when he gets Florence Pugh for this movie, he's like, "Yeah, Part 2's not really your movie, but Messiah's gonna be your movie." And that's how he got them both to like.
So I came out like, "Oh, this is very strong." I think it benefited from distance as opposed to both parts being shot back to back. You could tell that he had taken into account some of the criticisms and even like nitpicks. I remember one of the most persistent nitpicks I would hear is like Zendaya's accent not matching anyone else. Just like, why is she the only one with like an American accent amongst all the Fremen? And so the second movie had to go out of its way to be like, oh, whatever, different tribe, they have different accents. Shut up.
Yeah, it's different. Shut up about it. I have seen a lot of pushback, even more than the first half, from book readers. I have seen a lot of people kind of bitching and moaning, and I do emphasize that. They bitching and moaning because this is, as a guy who read the book years ago, like in high school, like I don't remember much, like it was the same time I was into reading A Clockwork Orange, where I was just like, yeah, I want books that making up words. Come on, let's fucking go. So I don't remember.
I want books I could barely comprehend.
Yeah, I don't even remember too much about the book myself. Like I would need a reread, but of course I rewatched Part 1 before this, just in clips and stuff, and I wasn't like sitting down and watching it again, but just a reminder, because it hasn't been too long. Like it's not going to be like Batman Part 2 where everyone's being like 5 years, how dare they? Like
it has been like 4, but
like, which is, I think, under 5 years is really fast for sequels. Like that is that we're living in a very comfortable society where we're like, oh yeah, we shot another part of the Avengers and is coming out right the next year. Like that is,
doesn't feel that long,
the
though.
comfortable life we are living.
But I think part of that is just the pandemic. Like, our sense of time dilation is all fucked now.
It's really true. I feel like people will be bitching and moaning about Falcon and Winter Soldier when that drops, because they'll be like, or whatever they're calling that movie, because that movie has been delayed so much.
Yeah, I forget what the new subtitle is, because it's had like a couple. Not as much as Akatha, but Jesus.
Yeah. But I do feel like this may have pissed off some book readers, because Denis Villeneuve is a visual storytelling director. Like, that is, like, he understands that that's what cinema is. It's visual storytelling. And I feel like that's why this movie is so great for what it is because it is so visually storytelling. Not a lot is said or explicitly like spat out at you. A lot of it is done in shots, in looks, and I feel like that's where the book readers are being like, well, they had a whole paragraph on this and it was a look, blah 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 blah, and you're just like, guys, it's an adaptation. You have to
rather
make
have
it
the
good
like
for cinema.
I would rather have the show don't tell ism of these 2 new movies, as opposed to like the constant telling and not showing that the David Lynch film has.
Yeah,
exactly. It tried to go for a very literal approach of just like, what if we translate all the descriptions in this book from the POVs into like having the actors stare in the middle distance while narration plays for like a good chunk of it. It's so awkwardly done.
And I feel that way, is that like that I maybe like the book readers got that like very faithful adaptation of Dune, and now they're getting somebody being like, I'm adapting it.
Sort of. Dune,
yeah, sort of.
The David Lynch Dune has like the hallmarks, but it is a case of like filmmaker really not understanding the material still. And even if it has more things in a couple places from the book on a superficial point, doesn't mean it really knows what to do with them.
And I feel like I've seen some interviews, and Denis Villeneuve and Hans Zimmer both read this when they were teenagers. Like they read Dune, same as me, and like that love it goes forward. But it also Denis Villeneuve has said that like he didn't that Frank Herbert didn't like that when people first read Dune, they were like, Paul Atreides, baby, yeah, like they were all like hyped up for him, when it's really a story about the Bene Gesserit sisters, like, and like, yes, and using religion as a weapon more than it is like a story about like some sick dude who rose to power. Like that's
which is so funny, because even though this film goes so much out of its way, more so than the original material ever did, to like try and set up a foundational point for Messiah to be like, this is why this is a fucking problem. People are still like, yo, Paul's so cool, House Atreides forever.
It's very true. You're like, it's one of those things though that I've also seen people being like, and stupidly being like, oh, they're just doing Anakin from Star Wars. And I'm like, what do you think Anakin was based off of, motherfucker? What do you think it was based off of? Like, where do you think
that's the
George
thing.
Lucas got that from?
If it's not a movie, people don't know it exists.
And
can't just tell someone that
Dune, the 50s, like
65.
65, like, come on, guys, that's 10 years before Star Wars, and Star Wars didn't even
Star Wars
didn't even fucking do like Anakin with his rise to power to the prequels. So it's like obvious that the prequels are doing a reference to Dune in that aspect where they're like, oh, a fake Messiah figure, you know, like, or not even fake Messiah, just the problem with Messiah figures, you know, like putting so much power into them is the thing. And I think that Denis Villeneuve does a fantastic job of that in here, like without explicitly constantly shoving it in your face. He is giving you that kind of lesson, that kind of straightforward message of like, yeah, well, you know, it's cool that he's helping these people, but is it going to end well for anybody? No, it is not.
and that's kind of like where the like book purism starts to seep through. It's mostly in like the latter half, especially the ending, because this is just straight up kind of a different ending than the original book had, and it's mostly so it can set up Messiah well. But you know, when you're a book purist, you're like,
they changed something, and like, guys, hey, look at me, book reader. Look at those books behind me. Look at behind the shrine, books behind them. But we also understand that you need to adapt. You need to change things to make it work for screen. And it's what you do that matters. Because, of course, there is, like, say, our generation loves Harry Potter. You know, like, even if with all the shitty shit that J.K. Rowling has done, we're big Harry Potter heads.
Keeps getting
endlessly. Worse. You're just like, shut the fuck up. Somebody, like she had a really good editor before. Hire that person to watch your tweets. You know, like, god damn. But like the thing is that like we all know that feeling of Prisoner of Azkaban to Goblet of Fire. You know, like that feeling of like, oh, Prisoner of Azkaban as a movie is different than the book, but it keeps true to like everything going on, you know, like, and it feels right. But then you go to Goblet of Fire and you're like, it's just missing parts. It's just missing things, you know, like, and you're angry. I mean, I'm angry. I'm always angry about Goblet of Fire, but like it's one of those things that it was one of my favorite books of the series to go, and then it's I think the worst of all the Harry Potter movies, you know, like, because it's just feels disconnected, disjointed. It's trying to shove book parts in, but
it does struggle parts with like how long Goblet of Fire is, which is ironic because I feel like even Order of the Phoenix has its own problems, but it's still able to even adapt that fairly well, and that's an even longer book,
right? You're just like, and still I think that the Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince are weaker entries in the whole series.
Half-Blood Prince is the one I have major beef with. I think I think it wastes a lot of fucking time.
Yeah, it does.
Focusing on the wrong things.
Having the two parts for the final one is better, but it still causes, you know, I feel like pacing issues, you know, like, and I never felt that while reading the original book, you know, like I just fucking stormed through that shit. But like, I feel like our generation understands that feeling. So I know that like the people bitching about the book purism of this movie, you're just like, what are you bitching about? This movie is stacked, my friends. Stacked.
You also have to think about it on different levels. There's a difference between like, you can think about it like, how do I feel about it, me as someone who's read the book, as it feels as like an adaptation representing that material. But there's also the point of like, how much does this work as a movie, and how will it play to someone who doesn't give a shit and hasn't read it?
And I feel like, as you know, as a movie for people who have never read the book, this is fantastic. You know, like, this is a complete thing. It feels big. It feels epic. It's got an A-list cast, which I've heard some people being like, I hate that it's an A-list cast. It throws me off. You're like, just because you weren't expecting Christopher Walken doesn't mean that it's not badass that Christopher Walken's there.
I hear like, Christopher Walken come up a lot. Just like, oh, it's just so distracting. Just Walken comes in and he's just doing the Walken thing. I'm like, bro, that's just how Christopher Walken talks. Just don't knock the guy for the way he speaks. I think we forget that, like, because Christopher Walken's like mannerisms have become like so iconic and parodied that we forget that we used to cast him in shit like The Deer Hunter because he can be very menacing.
I feel that way with Jeff Goldblum too. I feel like, like his mannerisms have become meme-ish at this point, that like it's hard to cast him in things now, which is sucky because the man is a fantastic actor and has done a wide range of roles and could be in anything, like, but now they're like, of course, comedic, like throw him in a comedy or something like that. And I feel like Christopher Walken knows that he's not always a comedic actor, but there's been so many movies that make fun of him and who he is, like at this point, that like that's where that is coming from, like where they're just like, brr, 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 brr. Like, but I feel like Jason Momoa was more distracting in the first movie than Christopher Walken is here, like, because I feel like Christopher Walken's just Christopher Walken, but Jason Momoa is like always
like
kinda...
one, like Duncan Idaho, like personality wise is nothing like that in the book. And here comes Jason Momoa, like looking like he stepped straight out of California.
Yeah, right. I do.
And that still works.
Yeah.
In the same way that like in this they make Stilgar kind of the comedic relief just for a little bit of levity, but it is still, of the two, I would say Jason Momoa is a little like, you don't feel like you're supposed to be here.
Yeah. Talking about the cast, I do think this might be Timothée Claremont's or Timothy Claremont's
Chalamet.
Where'd
you get Claremont?
I don't know. Sorry. Chalamet's I think this might be his best. I think this might be his best movie, acting wise. I'm saying that because I feel like, and this was said to me where I was like, he's kind of playing himself in a lot of roles, and somebody was like Johnny Depp, and I was like, yes, almost exactly like Johnny Depp, where the man's a good actor, but he's kind of always playing Johnny Depp, and I feel like Timothée is always playing himself here in a lot of movies, and I feel like he kind of dissolves into Paul in this adaptation. I feel like there is that. This might be one of his best.
There is that sense when the first movie came out about like, Chalamet's definitely nailing the like naive sort of kid, like in way over his head. But can he nail like Paul the leader?
Yes,
the like messianic figure by the time we get to that second movie, and I would say so. Yeah.
I can't talk. I haven't seen Call Me by Your Name, so I can't I haven't seen
that was
best
what
movie,
my reaction was. I feel like a lot of people would argue that as far as like career best for him.
Yeah. I haven't seen that yet, and that's my fault. I need to see that movie. But I do feel like he's really good here, surprisingly. I feel like in French Dispatch he just is himself, and in so many Wonka he's just himself. It's just like, come on, guys.
In a way, a very exaggerated version of himself. Wonka is like, I liked Wonka. It's like the entire time, though, it is just on the urge of being too twee for its own good. It's like constantly on that tightrope.
I think Zendaya did a great job here. I almost feel like we should have more Zendaya action films. I know she's kind of like only drama or comedy, but I feel like we need more action sequences with Zendaya because she is so good in this as like an absolute badass. I like her running forward in that final fight scene. Holy shit. You're like, all right.
Yeah, and the fact that it has a parallel to the exact same like dream sequence Paul had in the first movie, but it was him instead.
I do love that. I do think the absolute star of this film, the absolute steals the fucking show, is the best actress out of the whole movie, is Rebecca Ferguson. She's amazing. I thought she was great in the first part, but she shines here, absolute shines, and it's just incredible. I think she's incredible in this. It delivers a lot and does most of it through a fucking veil, and you're like, hell yeah, I just was so excited by that. I thought she was great in this. And I mean, you got to give credit to Javier Bardem. I feel
Bardem for
like,
Stilgar. Yeah,
yeah,
even in the first movie, he was like one of the highlights. Even though he's not in it much, it felt
mm,
like, wow, this one feels the most like stepped off the page.
yeah. I do, and I mean, Josh Brolin's great. I think it's great to have him back, and like, I thought that was nice. You know, like, I think that was like I think he's perfect in the role. You know, like, Josh Brolin is almost perfect in every role he is. You know, like, I feel like he just fits the place. But I will say I did enjoy Austin Butler in this. I'm kind of a big Austin Butler fan at this point. You know, like, I feel like Elvis, I was super surprised by, and I feel like this guy might be one of those like absolute rising stars that is just going to like keep showing how strong he is,
Yeah.
you know, like,
So long as he doesn't get a big head about it, I think.
yeah,
Like the rise of Austin Butler reminds me a lot of like Jared Leto when his acting career first
mm,
started, where there's like a lot of like acting prowess there and some genuine range. But
yes.
then Leto kind of let it get to his head, so now he's just kind of an egomaniac now.
Yeah, I do feel like it's funny that and I have to bring this up because it's been said so many times to me that everybody thinks that he can't get rid of the Elvis voice. And I've seen interviews on the Graham Norton show where he does talk about this, that like he was method for Elvis, and of course he wasn't method for this role because he was like, this role's a psycho, I can't do that, you know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't just be a method actor for this. But I do feel like, you know, he has held on to the Elvis voice a little, you know, like, but also I feel like maybe the singing and doing that voice, he says on the Graham Norton show, it's like hurt his vocal cords. So like, this is just his deeper voice now, you know, like he's just
Yeah,
Austin Butler, you know, like it's just like that's where he's at, you know,
yeah,
like
you get that wear and tear.
yeah, and I like that sucks, you know, like to be real, you know, like that's like a thing that happens to a lot of singers, and I feel like it's you know, if you're not trained enough, it can happen, you know, like where your voice does change because you
You
weren't
have to
prepared
be
or
careful
taught.
about that like vocal control and
Mhm.
like where you sing from. It's something that would always come up back with the original Broadway cast for Beetlejuice. The
Yeah.
original Lydia, Sophia Ann Caruso, like would grate her fucking voice to sing, and it worked for the emotion.
Mm.
But it's one of those things where just like that's not a long lasting thing you should do.
Yeah. You're just like, that will
Like
keep
you're getting
hurting
away with that
you.
because you're young, but you'll pay for that later. You got to stop that.
Mhm. I do think I mean, put Florence Pugh in any movie. That's I'll say it. I'll say it. Put her in any movie. I love her. I don't care. You know, like
You don't love her, Frank. You haven't seen Midsommar, you poser.
yeah, but I've seen what do you call it? Call me uh, uh what the fuck is that movie? Sorry, I've seen Don't Worry, Darling, and you haven't, so
Yeah, because I heard
so
it was
take that.
trash.
Hey, it was fine. It's kind of a modern Stepford Wives, and that's totally cool. But I mean, you got to give credit. Florence Pugh, fucking the last three movies of hers are absolutely fucking killer. Oppenheimer, The Boy and the Heron, and Dune Part 2. The woman is fucking killing it. And I feel like, yes, put her in everything, you know, like absolutely nonstop. Just keep giving this woman work. And then before I send it off, I feel like you have to give credit to Dave Bautista. I I feel like a lot of people
We're
feel
always
like,
constantly like giving the praise for Dave Bautista. This man can fucking act.
yes. And I feel like it shows even more here than even part one. I feel like he's great in part one, but I feel like he brings a lot to the role in part two. I feel like I don't know how anybody else could have played him. You know, like
Yeah, and I've seen people try to be reductive about it. We're like, Raban just kind of his only defining character trait is that he just kind of screams a lot. Just like, well, there's also that sense of like when you're acting like that constantly at like an 80 to 100 type of character, that's also
Mhm.
really hard to pull off without coming off as comical.
Yes, exactly. No, it's so true. It's like you come off as comic booky if you're just screaming constantly. And I feel like he is able to like capture that warrior spirit that's going on here without coming across as too much. Like I feel like he's able to do a lot of this. And then of course I feel like Lisa Doe, this is a Bond girl, so like it's one of those things where
Leia Seydoux.
Sorry,
I was wondering who you were talking about.
Sorry, I'm mispronouncing. She's a Bond girl, so it's one of those things that I feel like a lot of people count her out, but she's great. Like she is good in the role, and I feel like we'll get even more of her in.
Yeah, even before Bond, you had stuff like Blue is the Warmest Color.
Yeah.
So like this to like show that acting prowess. I was just watching Inglourious Basterds again the other day, and I forget that she's in that, like right before her career took off. In that. Yeah, she's one of the daughters in that opening scene. I'm like, oh shit.
And I mean, I don't think he played as big of a role this time, but Stellan Skarsgård is the Baron. Like he's in the Look at him behind you,
looming over my shoulder right now.
He is just like he embodies that role. He looks so good in the makeup. Like he's menacing as hell. Like
I'm pretty sure I had brought this up when we talked about the first film, but I actually like the take that they took with him here, because the Emperor in the original book was not really intimidating. He was just like, he was decadent, he was flamboyant, and just kind of like jovial in like a frightening sort of way.
Yeah.
Just like everything about him was like excess, gluttony, etc. Here I actually like the more like dour, looming force that makes him a lot scarier as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I find it super funny that every adaptation of Dune has misunderstood how his flotation device is supposed to work.
They're just like, change it up. Who cares? Do it
The
again.
point is the Baron is so overweight, like non-humanly overweight, like can't even support his own weight to move, that he has to use like floaters attached on different pieces of his bodies to even be able to walk. For some reason, ever since the Lynch film, we've interpreted it as he can fly, he can fly, he can fly. The Lynch film did that, the miniseries did that, and these two movies do that.
Now, I've never seen the miniseries. What is your thoughts on the miniseries?
It's fateful. It's an interesting experiment for the time, but this is pre-golden age of television trying to do a book with this sort of like scale and scope. It is the only adaptation to actually make it past the first book. They got up to the third.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
So that's something. And you have like actors like before they hit it big, like James McAvoy in it playing Paul's son. So you're like, oh, wow, cool. But it's still, it's a sci-fi TV show from that period. So, of course, it's going to be very cheap. And, boy, they're trying their best.
Oh, man. I was rewatching recently the Dinotopia series. And, like, I was a big Dinotopia kid. So, like, and I remember loving the show when I was a kid. And, like, rewatching it, I'm like, damn, that CGI is rough. But then when they don't use CGI and they use actual puppets, you're like, hell yeah, guys, let's fucking go. That looks
You're telling me I just rewatched all of Reboot, like the CG cartoon Reboot, which is the first full-length like CG animated show ever made. And I'm just like, wow, in some ways like this holds up and absolutely doesn't on a visual standpoint. It's interesting.
Right, it's sort of like that style at that point.
Yeah, and it has its own charm because of that, and you could tell like you forgive it because you know how much harder this was.
Yeah. Right. You're just like, they were putting in the fucking work to make this happen. Like that's something else. But to kind of get into the plot of this, I feel like Dune Part 2, of course, we knew this is the good parts. Like this is the climax. This is Act 3 as a movie. And I feel like maybe that's where a lot of the purists are getting a little angry, like they're like, well, it's just a part 3, like it's just being mad about it being the final part of it. And I like that.
I know.
I feel like they do a good job of being like, this is its own movie also. Like it's not just that in the third part and go. It's like,
I don't think it's that. I think I know because I've heard people get detailed into it. I know exactly what the fucking book fans are mad about. it mostly pertains to how they do the ending, and character-wise, specifically, it's Chani.
Really?
Because Chani is characterized very differently than she is in the books, in that she actually has shit to do. Because here's the thing, in the book, Chani and the rest of the Freemen, by extension, are very passive. And by a modern standpoint, it makes them, if you're going to do a modern adaptation of Dune, it makes them feel gullible. It just makes it seem like everyone is for the, like, yeah, whatever, Lisan al-Gaib, let's follow him. And I liked that the movie was all about, like, no, there are different factions and tribes of Fremen, and some follow that religion, some don't. So there are some that are, like, understandably skeptical about this whole, like, Paul as the Messiah thing. And by positing Chani in that position, it actually just gives her way more to do here, as opposed to just being the goo-goo-eyed, like, woman that Paul's with.
Yeah, I feel you on that. I feel like that's the thing here. We are dealing with an adaptation, and I think that he's made choices here, and that might piss off some book readers, but I feel like that's the modern thing to do. It's what needs to be done to, like, take it that step further. And sure, you can complain that all these AAA actors are throwing you off, like that you just weren't expecting them. But that's that's what makes this movie so powerful, is that it is so many big actors in a sci-fi movie. Guys, you are fucking you so spoiled, because, like, sci-fi is a hard fucking genre. It's a hard genre to do, and to have a, like, kind of epic legacy material movie happen, and for so many big names to sign on and really do it, is fantastic. And for Denis Villeneuve not to really lean into actual sets and actual, like, lighting from the desert, and, like, mostly just using the fucking sun for lighting, which, first off, holy shit that he did that. Like, that's insane to me that he was mostly using just the sun for this movie. And you're just like, holy crap, because that's insane for some of these battle sequences that are happening at sunset. Like, that's insane.
And frankly, you're lucky you even got the second part. I was so terrified when I had found out that part 1 and 2 were not shot simultaneously, and he was banking on part 1 doing well. Just like, I don't know, Dune is kind of heady. It might not vibe with modern audiences unless you really make it work for people. And this was on the cusp of, like, lockdown too, and no one was fucking going to the movies. So I'm like, oh no. If we only cover the first half of the first book, this is going to be a real problem.
Yeah, I did think that was, we enjoyed part 1, but I think that, with it not being greenlit at the time, it was very, like,
I remember,
oh shit, this is going to be another lost movie.
Like, being real hesitant as to, like, judging it as to, like, whether or not that second part was going to happen.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's interviews with Hans Zimmer, and he's the one who was like, yeah, I read the book. I'm going to keep sending you music for part 2. Like, which I think is awesome, that he was just composing, like, so believing in it.
Composing, like, for Dune was a dream of his. It's why he didn't compose Tenet and Oppenheimer, because it's just like, nope, doing a Dune movie has been a dream of mine. I'm sorry. Even though, like, Nolan is usually his boy.
Right? It's kind of like, it's almost like, Spielberg and John Williams, where it was like, they have this man on retainer, like, for these movies. And, like, I always felt that way about Nolan until Tenet and Oppenheimer I was like, it's gotta be Zimmer, like, but nope.
No.
And I think that this movie is absolutely elevated by Hans Zimmer's score here. I mean, every Hans Zimmer score is fantastic. I think the man's one of our living legends. But I think that it raises the bar here. This is one of his best. I think that it elevates this movie. I think that there's a lot of the visual storytelling is delivered even better with just the soundtrack behind it. Like, I feel like a lot of the visual storytelling going on is brought forth with his soundtrack here, and you could kind of, like, feel the love coming from this. And I think that
Yeah.
that's so cool that Hans Zimmer was like the first one brought on for part 1, and he was the first one believing in part 2, you know, being like,
Yeah.
here's the love theme, here's all this, you know.
And he's already said that he's like writing music for Messiah as well, even though Messiah might be a few years off. Like, he's a man who likes to like start early and stay late. Even like for the score for Interstellar, he had like started writing that music while the movie was still in pre-production. Like, there wasn't even a finished script yet. And Nolan was cool with it because he knows that's just how Zimmer likes to work. He's just like, here's the general vibes of what we're going for. This is what we want to do. And also have an organ. And Zimmer's just like, I'm gonna go fucking nuts.
And I mean, everyone's kind of making fun of the soundtrack for this, you know, with the wah, like the scream yelling here, but I think that it delivers the feel. And
well, I feel like
it's
vibe. It's no different than like the trend that we used to have like over 10 years ago, like around peak, like James Cameron's Avatar, of like the like sad vocal singing for a dramatic scene.
Yeah. I am kind of blown away by Hans Zimmer here. I think that it you know, a soundtrack's supposed to elevate the material, and I feel like that's absolutely what's going on here. And it is one of the
it is insanely loud. I remember when part 1 came out and like going to the movies for something else. I think it was an anime movie, but it was like further down the hall for like one of the further movie houses. And I walked by one that was playing Dune, and all you could fucking hear was like, like into the hallway. You're like, Jesus.
Yeah, it's funny. I went to see it at Chunky's, and it was in one of the bigger theaters, so I love that at Chunky's in Manchester. And the funniest thing I noticed, because I like ran to the bathroom at one point, is that no other theater had a closed door. Like Kung Fu Panda, like you know, all the other movies playing at the moment, nobody had closed the doors to the theater, but they had closed the door to Dune because they knew how fucking loud it was. You know?
I'm sure they probably did something similar for Oppenheimer, because Oppenheimer's also pretty loud.
It was so loud. I remember seeing Barbie and hearing Oppenheimer through the fucking walls, you know, like, so you're just like, shit, you know, like that's some fucking loud ass shit, you know, like fucking love that. Like, I can't believe, you know, like this is the week that End of Evangelion's coming out, you know, and it's going to be playing, and I'm sure it's going to be playing next to Dune, and you're going to be sitting there being like, giant robots, and all of a sudden just like through the fucking walls. You're going to be like, shit. Like, but I think this is one of those great movie going experiences. Like you know, I've said it for a couple of movies on this podcast, but this is one of those movies you want to go see in theaters. You absolutely do. The action is big, the sound is big, the actors are big, you know, like this is absolutely worth seeing in theaters. Do not wait till it's on Max. Like do not
especially
wait.
especially after like not having much of a choice with the first one. Show some respect. Like, I saw it at the Alamo Draft House, and they always have a really good projection and sound system, thankfully, more so than like any of the big chains out there. I do want to see it again, especially since the Coolidge has been like playing it in 70 millimeter. I'm like, fuck, I want to go see it again just for that, just like did Oppenheimer.
It's funny. I want to watch a you know, a Kill Bill ultimate cut sort of thing where they put them both together. I know it would be an extremely long theater experience, but I do feel like I want to watch them in succession, like right after each other.
I had my buddy Rob went to go see it. He did it for a friend's birthday. And he hadn't seen the first one, so he like watched the first movie like the day of on Max, and then went to the movies later to see part 2.
Nice.
And coming out of the first one, he said he felt like it was mostly set up, and then he felt like the second one was a payoff. He's just like, okay, I definitely like this more watching them like not too long from each other. And I feel like upon rewatches, that'll probably be how I treat it. Like, I will treat it like whenever I feel like watching Lord of the Rings, I will watch all 3 extended Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, come on. Let's be real, you know, like you can't just leave it at the first one, which, you know, one of the best cliffhangers, but like, you know, like that's got to keep going. Like, got to get into.
And that's baby. I still don't own the first one on Blu-ray, and that's mostly because I really wanted the Steelbook, and the Steelbook sold out so fast. But now that the second film is out, I'm like, okay, I'm sure there'll be, even if it's not a Steelbook, I'm sure there'll be some nice, like, double feature fucking box set for it or something.
Yeah, something good. Now, I do feel like, speaking on like the setup to the payoff, that like it does do that extremely well. I feel like, like you can this is a different movie than part 1. Like part 1, I would say I would describe it to people who hadn't seen it as Game of Thrones in space. Like where it was just like, oh yeah, lots of houses, lots of drama, like that's how I describe it. That's not how I describe part 2. Like I don't feel like this is trying to be sort of like a modern like Game of Thrones evocation of this. And I've seen that with some of the criticism that people have been leveraging at it, being like, oh yeah, the fight scenes aren't as good as Lord of the Rings fight scenes. And you're like, motherfucker, Lord of the Rings wasn't even supposed to have that good of a fight scenes, like you're like,
and
that
also
was
Dune's not necessarily about book, its like fight scenes. Most of its fight scenes, even the material, are like very simple, efficient, like knife fights. It's not really about like the specific action so much as like the wider spectacle.
And I will say here that, like, yes, are the fight scenes as big and as epic as say a Two Towers or Return of the King or something? No, but that's kind of not the point. Like that's not what they're going for. This is insurgency fighting. This isn't army on army battling it out for the Two Towers. Like this is for Minas Tirith, it's like, like this is this is strictly like guerrilla warfare, and I feel like
this is also sci-fi, not fantasy,
extremely well. Yes, and I think that's where like what's going on here is because how epic it is, people don't have a frame of reference for it, so they immediately jump to Lord of the Rings battles or something else, like, and you're like, that's a fantasy book, like that's not what this is, like
different beast.
And I gotta say, I'm still thinking about the them taking down the walker the first time, and them doing the RPG into the helicopter, and like that scene is so good fight wise, like, and I think it's because they're able to like keep stakes going while still moving forward with it. And I think that's why that scene stands out so much. Sure, is the end battles as epic as, a big army fight scene? No, but did a bunch of worms fuck up a pyramid? Fuck yeah, they did. Yeah. And like, and you're like, what more do you need? Like, like, what the fuck are you talking about?
And action also benefits like character and storytelling. Again, as George Lucas once said, and then immediately contradicted himself once he did the prequels, a special effect without a story is a very boring thing.
Yes. And I, as somebody who just watched Rebel Moon, yeah, that's fucking true. That's fucking true. I just watched part 1 of Rebel Moon the other day, and sure, it's bad, but it's kind of a fun bad in a way where you're just like, it is bad. Like, don't get me wrong. This is a bunch of loose parts that they were like, I like Star Wars and I like Warhammer, like, and I also love Seven Samurai, like he just kind of fucking slammed them all together. But like the spectacle of it is fun, like that's the fun part. But there is scenes where you're just like, that was the coolest effect in the fucking movie, and it was for a character that was in a bar, like you're like what the fuck was that, like, and I mean, it's very like that bar scene is very Star Wars, where they're trying to be like, yeah, it's very Mos Eisley, like look at these fucking aliens everywhere.
I mean, it was originally developed as a Star Wars movie before they were like, no, like fine, I'll just fucking turn it into my own thing. Which
it's definitely Zack Snyder being like, I'll just do Star Wars with blackjack and hookers. Fuck you, like, and that is like, which by the way, I didn't realize that was a dated reference. By the way, me saying like, I'll just do it myself with blackjack and hookers. I said that to our now former intern at our job, and he looked at me like I said something so offensive, and I like looked at him like, it's from Futurama. It's from Futurama. You know, like I'm just like I'm not fucking just saying that shit. You know, like you're like wait a fucking second. You know, like and like you're like oh no, I didn't realize I was making like an outdated fucking reference. Really, you know, I thought this was universal. Old.
But
I was like fuck.
But yeah, and to be fair, that's Snyder's prerogative. Let's not act like Star Wars isn't fucking derivative itself.
Oh no, and we already talked about that. Like definitely they are taking like I know people being like, Dune is too much like Star Wars, and you're like, no, Star Wars is too much like Dune. Like let's put some respect. You know, like on the fucking name, you know, like
it's already a melting pot as is. It's Dune, it's the fucking Hidden Fortress, it's a bunch of westerns, it's a lot of things.
It's a lot of things. And I feel like that's the problem with current Star Wars at the moment is it's not taking a lot of things and slamming it together like original Star Wars did.
The only one that understood that principle was The Last Jedi.
Yeah. I agree right there. You're just like, oh shit, but they actually understood the fucking assignment. But
yeah,
you know,
as far as the
I'm
movies
sure we're
go,
saying
anyway.
some fucking inflammatory shit there, but you know,
Last Jedi, we stand Last Jedi in this house, fight us. But yeah, I had like brought this up as a concern when we talked about the first movie. That Dune has been so picked clean by pop culture that when you try to do an adaptation of it for modern audiences, it'll feel derivative even though it was the trendsetter. It's the same problem as adapting, like, say, a Doc Savage book or trying to adapt something like John Carter of Mars. Like, it's so permeated in storytelling that it's going to come off as cliche even though it was there first.
I feel that way about trying to do a Tarzan movie, you know, like is that there's 32 or 36 Tarzan books, but for some reason we can't fucking put together anything but the first book of Tarzan, you know, like we can't, you know, like, and the same thing happens for even Sherlock Holmes. I feel like, you know, like that the body has been picked clean, that it comes across as derivative when you try to do a straight up Sherlock Holmes adaptation.
Same thing with like the new Poirot movies. You need to like push some sort of gimmick in order for people to buy it. So with Sherlock Holmes's case, you have like the BBC show, which is like, all right, it's in modern day. All right, that's what we're doing. Or even with the Guy Ritchie films, where it's just like, this is Sherlock Holmes for 14-year-olds, where it's like very actiony and kind of snatchish. You're like, sure, all right.
The other thing that I felt like it's funny, the first thing I said to you, the thing I texted to you was like, oh, that was metal as shit. You know, like that Dune Part 2 was super metal. And it's funny because I'm saying that because there's so many metal albums that directly reference Doom, you know, like Dune, not Doom, but like they directly reference it and love on it. So it's like, it is funny to like finally, you know, like see that reference in full. And it just comes across as this movie's kind of metal as shit, you know, like it's like it's kind of badass in a lot of ways.
It's been there, and it's nice for people to like actually start to recognize it. Like when the first film came out, Nerdist had put out a video of like, here's a bunch of Dune references in pop culture way before this like first Villeneuve movie came out. And you see it in like Star Trek The Next Generation. You see it in fucking The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. There are several Dune references in Billy and Mandy. It's really funny. And they do deep cut shit too. It's not just the first book. Like they're referencing like book 4 shit. Just like, oh, someone on this writing team was just super into Dune and just wanted to make some Dune jokes. Even though no one else but like the real ones would get it.
Would understand.
And even the fact that like the Fatboy Slim video with Christopher Walken comes full circle because Christopher Walken's in this.
Right.
And one of the lyrics is like, dance without rhythm and don't to not attract the worm. A lyric that no one fucking got when that song came out.
And now, you know, like you're like, I kind of love that though. Like it's one of those things that it is such a big cultural touchstone that to see this like big epic adaptation of it is the best any fan could hope for. That's why I'm kind of upset about the book purists, because like
I can talk about like what they actually have issues with.
Yeah.
I'll just get into it. So beyond what I had already said about like Chani having like the different characterization,
Yeah.
by extension, that affects the ending. The ending on paper and like what we get accomplished is very similar. They seize the capital. The Baron is killed. Paul takes over as the emperor with like the conceit that like I will marry your daughter, so I marry into this empire. However, in the book, Chani remains as Paul's concubine, which ties into a whole hang up that like Jessica and Duke Leto had, where like Duke Leto regretted in his life that he never married Jessica because he truly loved her, but never married her because he needed that like political advantage to potentially marry someone, and that carries over like a generational thing. It's like an irony.
Yeah, it's like he didn't like that about his father, and then he still does it, you know,
exactly.
Like, sort of thing. Yeah.
So with the book, it ends with the idea that, like, yes, I will marry Princess Urulan, but it will just be a political marriage. I will never touch her. Yeah. You will be my concubine. You will bear my children. My children will be my heirs. And that will be, he's like, and that will be enough. You will be basically my wife, even if you don't have the title. And that's more or less how the book ends, with like Jessica reassuring Chani of that fact.
Yeah.
Which is cool for a book written in 1965. But now it's just like, wow, what a fucking 1965 view of feminism. Just like, it's okay. You're my concubine. Everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
So I actually prefer that they actually made Chani a foil who's like against this idea and sees the problem with like this Bene Gesserit like manipulation of her people, and makes her a potential foil for the next one, which also gives her more to do for the next one. But I get it. I think it's a very smart change as someone who's read the book, but I also get why book purists are just like, can't see why it works and are more just mad about the change that they bothered to, that they dared to change it at all.
Yeah. I get that, you know, like I get that where you're just like, why would they ever change this thing? But at the same time, does it work? Does it fucking work? It's not just a change for change's sake, motherfuckers. Like, think about that a little bit, you know, like that there's changes that make it a little bit more modern, you know, a little bit less problematic, you know, like like a little more something.
It makes the Fremen seem, again, a lot less gullible.
Yes.
So it makes a lot more sense, and it lays the foundational work very well for Messiah, and it also saves things that we didn't do here so that we could potentially just do in Messiah to give that book a little more stuff, because Dune Messiah isn't very action-packed, but the stuff that they've added here to sort of set it up will help that a bunch. They even made the change that in the movie here, we keep Jessica pregnant.
Yes,
whereas
but I know that she's born in the book.
Yes, there's a 4-year time skip after like Paul and Jessica join the Fremen.
Yes.
So the child Aelia is born, and she's sort of like this prescient kid who has like the mind, because Lady Jessica became the Reverend Mother while she was pregnant. It affected the baby, and so we have like a psychic prescient 4-year-old running around.
Yeah,
really tough to try and pull off in a movie. The Lynch film tried it to varying degrees of success.
I really like this, you know, like like this is the change that I will defend, because I really like the kind of scariness of that everyone can talk to this unborn child. Like I don't like I feel like it's kind of first off very metal, very like unexpected, and I first off love the shots of in the womb and the eyes fucking open when it like takes in the pains of generations. I was like, yeah, you know,
I like that
like,
too, because one, it's way creepier, and two, it's easier to pull off, because if we tried to do the like 4-year-old thing, it'd be weird. We'd either try to age it up just so we could have like some sort of consciousness in a kid to like maybe be able to act through it like the Lynch film did, which even that was like so. And it might come off as comical. So I think just keeping her
it would be a weird tone flip, you know, like is what I think.
So just keeping her pregnant and just having like this omniscient baby inside her is way creepier, and I dug that. And it's also like that thing where like people who aren't in the know could look at Jessica and think she's insane because she's just like constantly talking to her stomach. It's like, yes, my precious daughter, we will.
I think that Anya Taylor-Johnson, Anya Taylor-Johnson as
Joy.
the voice. Sorry, God damn it. Sorry about that. But I think that she is really good as the voice. You know, like I feel like it's like it's subtle, it's not too much. You don't go immediately, oh, it's her, until you see the future.
And her being
vision.
there at all is like a future vision is also like a direct Messiah setup, because there's like a 4-year time skip in the first book. I think Messiah is like 10 years after the first book.
Oh shit. Okay. So it's a big jump.
Yeah.
All right.
Which I imagine they will truncate somewhat for this one in the same way they truncated the time skip here. It'll still work, but I like that they're just like, we're sort of doing the Alien thing, but we're going to not do the weird stuff that might come off as silly, but we'll still keep that, and we'll tease the older one directly as like a Messiah thing. So even though Anya Taylor-Joy's here for like 2 seconds, assuming we get to do Messiah, she'll have a much bigger part, we promise.
Which, I mean, this movie made bangbusters. I feel like they're obviously gonna do Messiah.
It made as much money as the first one did in its first week.
Yeah, that's big. You know, like that's big. And
as soon as I had like seen how big the profit was from that first weekend, I'm like, oh, we're getting Messiah.
We're getting Messiah. Yeah, right. Like, and in our Hollywood society of, I want a franchise to keep going. You know, like this is the perfect.
This is what we used to do. You don't like think you hope for a franchise, but you worry about one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm. Instead of being like, oh, you know, like, and I feel like,
here's your fucking 6-movie contract. Let's hope the first film is even watchable.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll understand, Frank. Madam Web, Morbius, they're going to be huge. It's going to be the next big thing.
Craven's going to fucking change everything. Oh my God. I do love how much Madam Web fell on its face. I know that has nothing to do with anything, but I do. Like, I mean, I turned on Morbius the other day because it's on Disney Plus, and holy shit, even in the first like 5 minutes, you're like, somebody should have shut this down. Somebody should have said no, you know, like, and I'm sure Madam Web is even worse, you know, like, I'm just like, okay, I'll watch that when it's free on something.
I'm so glad Dakota Johnson got like left her agency.
Yeah,
like
right?
post like this and 50 Shades of Grey, it's been one of those things where like, Dakota Johnson, I know you can act. I know it's not your fault, but you're in like the shittiest fucking projects.
And I heard Sony was kind of lying to them about this, that they were basically implying to make them, that they were part of the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's kind of fucked up. Like, just being like, no, you're going to be a Spider-Man, you know, like, you're going to be part of the Spider-Man universe. Come on, you're part of the Marvel. And then, you know, the start of the movie is like, in association with Marvel, you know, like, and you're just like, wait a minute, you know, like, wait a fucking second. I mostly feel bad for Sydney Sweeney, because I'm sure she felt like, holy shit, I get to be Spider-Woman, you know, like, I get to like do this big Marvel role, and then it's just fucking Madam Web, and you're just like, fucking hell, you know? God damn, like,
it's okay. It's almost like a rite of passage to know you've really made it in Hollywood.
Yeah. And I feel like she's at this time where people will go to see movies for her, you know, like, same thing as Florence Pugh. I feel like people will go see the movie for her, and I you know, like, that shows with Sydney Sweeney with her new like demon baby movie that's coming, Immaculate, you know, like, that's coming out, and I feel like that's gonna do money, even though it's just a horror movie, you know, like, it's gonna make some serious buck, you know, like, when in a world where, you know, it has to be to get big money horror movie wise, you got to do something big, you know, like, and I feel like this is a very small kind of like non-horror movie, and still it's gonna make bangbusters, you know, like, and you're like, I'm for that, you know, like, you're like, please give us more horror movies, you know, like, so you're just like, and I feel like if we can attach these big names to it, we can get more out of these things.
Yeah,
you know,
and like, the same like applies here. So I really like this movie. Yeah. It's very good. It makes me, I was cautious about a Messiah adaptation, and I've gone from that to like really looking forward to the Messiah adaptation. And I know that Villeneuve says that's as far as he wants to go. I get that, because Messiah is more or less the epilogue to the first book, because the book the first book kind of ends a little open-ended, and that sort of completes that first story. And then after that, if you want to do Children of Dune and God Emperor Dune, it's gonna get real fucking weird.
It's gonna get real fucking weird. Like, yeah, I agree. Where you're like, are we gonna get worm people? What are we up to here? Like you're like, wait a fucking second. I did enjoy this movie too. I am not as ecstatic. Like I had a hard time giving this a 9, but it is an 8.5 for me because this is above than what you normally see. I think that this is a fantastic watch. It's worth seeing in cinema. I just don't know if it's as like perfect as like I would hope, but at the same time, I really enjoyed it, really liked it. And don't get me wrong with taking away that 0.5. It's a hard decision for me, like
I don't. And I do think this would have shaken up the Oscars had it came out originally when it was supposed to.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it would have changed some things up. But I mean,
this, like,
at the same time, they wanted to give Oppenheimer its fucking due. I feel like they were definitely handing it its
I know
rewards.
And it had like basically no competition. But if Dune Part 2 had come out this past year, and because it had been pushed back, it would have made it more interesting. It would have made it less easy to guess. Because as I was watching the Oscars, I guessed every single award right except for 2.
Wow, that's pretty good.
And even like one of the 2 that I got wrong, it was a pleasant wrong. Where it's just like, man, hey. I would love American Fiction to win Best Adapted Screenplay, but it's probably not going to, and then it did. I'm like, oh sweet. Yeah. Love that.
I did think that this was a solid Oscars though. I feel like, like it was a lot of good things.
It kept the bullshit to a minimum. There wasn't much in the way of like sketches and skits and shit that just sort of waste time. Still not perfect, but just like a solid, like straightforward year that they definitely needed, especially after last year. They were not playing around. Just like, we're going to keep this as fucking simple as possible.
And I feel like this was one of the most watched Oscars in years. And I feel like that comes from actually nominating Oppenheimer and Barbie, like where it like those were some of the most watched movies of the year. And to ignore them would have been devastating for the Oscars. I feel like.
Although they kind of did, since they nominated Barbie to appease people, but it only walked away with 1 award.
Yeah. But then you still got to say Academy Award winning Barbie,
That is true. Even if it is even if it's specifically for Best Original Song.
And I mean, I was for Across the Spider-Verse for winning, just because I feel like it was fantastic and maybe not as flawed as Boy and the Heron, but give it to Boy and the Heron. The man's the GOAT. He deserves more than one fucking Oscar.
He got it for Spirited Away. That's the one everyone drools over. It's fine.
Yeah, but he lost for Howl's Moving Castle to Wallace and Gromit, Like, I feel like that's one of the biggest... Like,
Howl's Moving Castle's not that great.
What?
Howl's Moving Castle is visually amazing, but narratively makes no fucking sense.
I mean...
And it's a book adaptation at that point. So you actually have something to directly compare it to.
Yeah.
Howl's Moving Castle is charming, but it's nothing. Same thing with Boy and the Heron. Boy and the Heron has a little more going on for it, but like as far as where it's going up to,
I would say
I don't disagree with Wallace and Gromit, and honestly, I wish Across the Spider-Verse won.
I don't know. I feel like if you're gonna, Chris Miller said it best. It's like if you're gonna lose an Oscar, losing it to the GOAT is worth it. And it's one of those things where I love Across the Spider-Verse. I think it probably should have won. But if it was going to go to anybody, Boy and the Heron is the best animated movie of the year. Other than that, like I feel like that it's just it's pretty like, yes, I see what you're saying that like, but I would say Boy and the Heron's above Howl's Moving Castle in my opinion. Like,
and there is
rankings of it.
I would say so. Yeah, I think there's a lot more going on for it than it has for Howl's Moving Castle. Howl's Moving Castle is fun, but kind of shallow. But this is also, just to reiterate, because this has come up on the show before, this is someone who's a little hipstery when it comes to Miyazaki. Like, I respect Miyazaki as an artist, but I feel like people think he's the only fucking Japanese filmmaker that exists.
Yes. Yeah, that happens often, where they're like, oh, you I haven't seen like, I've seen a lot of people who don't watch anime being like, oh, but I've seen Miyazaki films, like, and you're just like, you're like, yeah, watch something else. Like you're just like,
yeah,
you're
please.
like, keep watching.
Watch
like
the Satoshi
keep
Kon
going.
film. Please watch Perfect Blue or Tokyo Godfathers or something.
Right, just like change up a tiny bit. There's a whole fucking nation, like they have their own awards, Academy Awards, like let's be real, like but to kind of wrap it up, guys, I really enjoyed Dune Part 2. I'm excited for more. I definitely deserves to be on your warp shelf if like
yes.
like
and I do
absolutely.
think I know Villeneuve has said that he's not going to jump immediately into Messiah because one, he's been focusing so much on these two,
on Dune,
kind of needs a break with other projects, which I think is probably smart.
Yes.
And plus, there's a time skip between Messiah anyway, so like let it sit. If it's guaranteed to happen, just like we can wait. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, yeah, go see this. See it in theaters. It's still in theaters right now. See it. I highly recommend seeing it in theaters because it is worth.
And if
the
you're
big
curious
boons.
enough, you can read the book yourself. If you're an audiobook listener, the I'm pretty sure at least for the first book, the audiobook is full cast, so that's always fun.
That is fun. And guys, thank you for listening to this episode of The Warp Shelf. Be sure to check us out on all the social medias. We're in a bunch of different places, and but basically just make the algorithm work. Like, comment, whatever the fuck down below to make
Feed
sure that you can continue to watch it on here, because you can check us out on galaxygeek.com if you want to check out the audio and the video version. You can watch this video version, see our smiling faces on YouTube. But if you're on listening to podcasts, we are on pretty much every podcast platform. If we're not, let us know, comment down below, we'll get it on there. And guys, I just want to say thank you for listening, for sticking around, supporting us yapping, and hopefully you enjoyed this review of Dune. And it wasn't as long as the actual movie, which is surprising for us, so just want to say thank you, and I appreciate every one of you.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Also, by the way, handles, since we didn't mention them, Yup Frank for you and Mod Karika for me.
Yes, absolutely. Check those out. And Yep Gundam, if you like Gundams, if you're listening to this going, this isn't my sci-fi, you're like, well, I got giant robot content for you. Fucking check that out. But guys, thank you so much for listening, and hope you have fun playing the Dune live service game. Maybe you're playing that right
now. Maybe. We'll see. Either way, we'll see you next time.
Adios.